Very much for those lovely refreshments. We're now going to enter the second part of this evening's proceedings, which is the question and answer session. We're going to have to move on to the next question with the opportunity to come back to some of these issues, particularly affecting the area in subsequent questions. So next up, can we have Graham Reid?
Hello, it's actually Andrew Reid, but I want to ask a question that relates to nuclear waste. It refers to an MOD report which talked about dealing with defunct submarines as a major issue, and that's a quote from the MOD report. And I want to ask Jim Murphy and his unionist colleagues, if Faslane becomes the main and only submarine base for the UK, which you're proposing, I think which you're all proposing, then what happens to defunct submarines in future? Are we going to have, there are going to be 10 new additional defunct submarines within the next 10, 15 years. Are they all going to be tied up as the others are currently at Rosyth? Or are we going to have an increasing number in the Gairloch or in Loch Long of defunct submarines with nuclear waste inside? Can I just finish by mentioning that the MOD report, which does exist, was issued in 1981, and it's 30 years ago since we were going to get rid of our first Polaris submarines. We haven't cracked that one in the last 30 years. And so is this bright new future for Faslane going to have an increasing number of aging, rotting, decaying submarines with nuclear content sitting around the corner from here in the Gairloch?
Jim?
Andy, picking up on your question about the 1981 Ministry of Defence report, and look, what we are saying and what I've said this evening, and this is the plan of the current government at the moment, and I have my criticisms of the current government, not least as we've already heard, have an aircraft carrier with no aircraft on it. It's a kind of no-brainer. You don't have to understand the details of military intricacies to know that that's what aircraft carriers are meant to carry. But what we're talking about here isn't about defunct submarines being based here or in Gairloch. We're talking about building 2 new generations, being built in Barrow. I am answering the question, Andy. The astute submarines being built in Barrow, and the Vanguard successor has been built in Barrow and then coming here. Now, how you decommission them, how you deal with the waste, is something that our scientists are working through. Of course they are, and we do that. We share responsibilities with our universities, our government, and our industry to do that. And it is, however, one of the pressures and one of the controversies around either nuclear power submarines, and nuclear equipped with missile submarines. Now, there's a confusion about those two, and the issue, I think, is about nuclear power submarines, not the Vanguard successor class that carry the nuclear weapons. Sorry, I can't hear you,
Sorry,
Madam. Sorry,
can we get a microphone over here?
Yeah, that's right. Yep, but I think, Madam, the point, you are right, the point I'm making is that there's a confusion sometimes in the public debate about nuclear-powered submarines and those submarines which are also nuclear-powered that carry nuclear weapons. And just for the avoidance of doubt, what the SNP are saying they get rid of is the Vanguard-class submarines that carry the nuclear weapons, not the Astute, which are also nuclear-powered. So basically, on all of the platform, all of the political parties are in favour of nuclear-powered submarines.
That's not actually true.
Well,
Kenneth, would you like to make a point?
The SNP doesn't support nuclear-powered submarines or nuclear missile submarines. And I have to say, you know, for Jim Murphy to say, well, I spoke to Angus Robertson, the defence spokesman, yesterday, and he assures me that it is. and he's been defence spokesperson for the SNP for 12 years, so I think he knows what he's talking about.
So which submarines would you have here?
Do you mind not interrupting me
would you
for
have
a
here
second?
then?
Give you a chance to come back in.
Okay.
You talked about us having a different policy in the East and West Coast. Well, that clearly is nonsense, because we're going to publish a white paper a year before the referendum, which will make absolutely crystal clear to everyone in Scotland what our defence plans are in detail, although I doubt any of the unionist parties will do likewise. But you have a different policy in one speech. In your speech earlier on, you said that we would have apprenticeships through nuclear weapons for 50 years, and then you talked about supporting multilateral nuclear disarmament. I mean, which actually is it? But you don't think it will be in the next 50 years? Hardly a cause for optimism. In the Labour Party, incidentally, when we last debated this in the Scottish Parliament, not one single Labour or Liberal MSP voted for the renewal of Trident. Not one of them. And yet they've done a somersault based on what they've been told by their bosses at Westminster. That's the reality. Not one of them. It was the 17th of June 2007. Anyone can look it up. And every single Lib Dem voted against renewal of Trident. 2 Labour MSPs, Bill Butler and Malcolm Chisholm, voted against Trident, and the rest took the courageous decision to abstain on the issue.
Jim?
You heard it this evening. Basically, all of us subs are nuclear powered. These guys are now saying they don't want nuclear-powered submarines, which means there'll be no submarines coming to this area. I mean, it's pretty clear. And when it comes, I mean, that's straight from his mouth. There's no, I mean, just seconds ago, Kenny has said it. And on this point about nuclear weapons, like, as I said earlier, no one wants to have nuclear weapons, right? But it's a question about what's the best way of getting rid of them. I'm not a unilateralist. I never have been. I never have been a unilateralist, and I don't think it's the right thing for us to do to give up on nuclear weapons.
Thanks very much, Jim. I do believe that the question was directed at unionist colleagues too. So, Annabel?
Obviously, nuclear-powered submarines eventually involve nuclear waste. You're absolutely correct. Is that an easy issue to resolve? No, it's not. Is that one of the difficult and perplexing balances that have to be made? And I said during my contribution at the very beginning of this evening that I accept that the whole issue of both nuclear weaponry and nuclear-powered submarines is a highly emotive one, and people feel passionately about it on both sides of the argument. My view is that I think on balance at the moment, although I would like to see multilateral disarmament, on balance at the moment, I don't think you achieve that objective by unilaterally giving up your nuclear facility. So on balance, and you may disagree with me, I am for keeping the nuclear deterrent at the moment, but I would certainly like to encourage international action to facilitate and indeed speed up negotiations to aim for, as Ruth was saying earlier, a real implement of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So I can't give you an exact answer as to what happens to waste. It is a consequence of feeling that that is a necessary policy to support, and I fully respect your right to disagree with that policy. But can I turn to something which Kenny said? Because, to be fair to him, he is consistent. He's saying that his party doesn't want nuclear-powered submarines, and Jim is quite correct. I believe every Royal Naval submarine is now nuclear-powered. You can actually get non-nuclear-powered submarines, and they are actually called air-independent propulsion submarines. You can get them, okay? Trouble is, they are not cheap. They're actually extremely expensive. And so that's where Kenny hits a major problem. What his party wants, if you relate it to his £2.5 billion budget, becomes extremely difficult to accommodate. The information I have is that the bottom end price of a non-nuclear powered submarine is 65 million quid, bottom end. The top end of the market is 200 million quid, so it's pretty obvious if you take something in the middle and you want half a dozen submarines, even on a non-nuclear basis, Kenny's budget is beginning to crack at the edges.
You'll build and buy them in 1 year.
Kenny, I'll give one. Kenny, if you can have one quick word on this, because we will need to press on.
You don't build this over 1 year, but I mean, we've heard a lot. We are hearing a lot of them what we've talked about. In terms of nuclear power, what we're talking about with the waste is something which lasts for 250,000 years. Is that really something we want to bequeath to our descendants. And clearly the nuclear deterrent doesn't work. Israel has nuclear weapons. It was still attacked in the Yom Kippur War. It didn't stop Britain being attacked in the Falklands by Argentina. It didn't stop Vietnam and China going to war when China had nuclear weapons. It doesn't actually work. It's immoral, as Ruth said, and we have to look at a strong conventional defence. There are 51 independent states in Europe. Only 3 have nuclear weapons. Are the 3 nuclear weapons powers right and the other 48 wrong? I don't think so.
Now, just very quickly, I have Alan Reid telling me he knows the answer to this question. Alan Reid?
Well, there is a government programme known as SDP, which coincidentally was a party I was once a member of. But in this case, it stands for Submarine Dismantling Programme, which is the government's programme to investigate how best to get rid of these nuclear submarines, which, as the questioner said, are a problem. At the moment, there are 7 tied up at Rosyth, the rest are tied up at Devonport, but storage space at Devonport to tie them up will soon be ruled out. The solution, which I think that the government will end up with, is breaking open the reactor compartment at Devonport, because after a certain length of time, the nuclear waste inside has decayed to a sufficiently low level that it is then possible to safely open up the reactor compartment. So I think the solution that will be ended up with is that the reactor compartment will be broken up at Devonport, and the nuclear waste packaged and sent to Sellafield, then the rest of the submarine can go for scrap, the same as any other non-nuclear material.
Okay, right, let's move on to the next question. It's Andrew Nisbet.
Thank you. Part of my question has already been asked in terms of the size and nature of the Scottish Navy, but I am finding it very difficult to understand the SNP line on this whole point. At one level, they are looking for a new start for Scotland under independence. Why then do they want to negotiate part of the UK Navy? Why not decide what you actually need and then procure that? But I don't buy this idea that there will be the same number of jobs at Faslane, and I would really like to know what views of the panel are as to how many jobs we are likely to lose. And the final part of the question is who, under the dismantling of the nuclear facility at Faslane, would be responsible for paying for it?
Kenneth Gibson, how many jobs do we stand to lose locally?
Well, in terms of Trident, the number, according to MOD, according to Freedom of Information, there are 520 people directly employed in terms of the nuclear deterrent. Not the ludicrous 19,000 that we actually heard last month being trotted out by the local Labour MP. I have to say, though, I can't understand the kind of point of view that's been put there that Scotland should become independent, and the hundreds of millions, if not billions, that we've contributed towards our share of the upkeep of the Royal Navy, we should just walk away from. I mean, surely we are entitled, just as we we would accept a share of liabilities, to a share of the assets from this division, and we're not going to rip apart, to use the kind of scaremongering language of Jim Murphy, the Royal Navy. We will sit down with United Kingdom ministers and we will negotiate. Now, we can't just say to the United Kingdom government, we'll take this, this and this. It's a negotiation. I expect that both sides will look at that in the correct spirit. In terms of the base, we've looked at the Norwegian Navy's base at Håkonsvern, and indeed Graham McCormick, who's sitting there, has actually visited that Norwegian base, and it actually employs more people than Faslane does at the moment. So we're confident, in actual fact, that the Navy we have will be able to retain the same number of service jobs, and indeed those jobs in civilian jobs. And of course, if we look at the economy of Dumbartonshire, not all the money from the base circulates in the local economy, possibly because many of the service personnel don't actually live that near the base. With a Scottish Navy, the personnel are more likely to live closer, and there's more likely to be more money spent in the local economy.
Jim, would you like to come on this?
I think this is one of the biggest issues come the referendum in the local community. Of course it's going to be, and you've just got to make a decision as to which politicians you trust, and I know the answer to that will be none, but which one you distrust the most or distrust the least. And just thanks. I say I've admired on the two of you since I turned up. You've applauded every word he said, even when it's been nonsense. So I'll leave it to others. Look, but you just have your own common sense judgment in these things, because politicians will argue the extremes and they'll do it pretty passionately. But here's a truth: we're building the biggest aircraft carriers in the history of the Royal Navy, right? Partly in the Clyde and being assembled in Rosyth, 3 times the length of a football pitch, just to give you a kind of sense of the scale of these things. Now, do you really think an independent Scotland, regardless whether it's Norway, Denmark, Ireland, or whichever other country we kind of go on a tour of, do you really think they're going to have, in the future, building aircraft carriers of that size at any point in decades to come? The new destroyers, partly built, brilliant. I mean, the most sophisticated warship the Royal Navy has ever built, constructed and launched in the Clyde and tested on the Clyde. And when you look at the new Type 26 destroyers, the frigates that are going to be built, and every submarine being based here, right? Every single submarine of the Royal Navy being based here, then just make a judgment. Do you think there are going to be more people employed in Royal Navy maintenance and construction with all of that package, or the SNP's wish list that is continually changing depending on what question you ask? And really, you'll make your own judgment. I think most people in Scotland know that we do get a great deal when it comes to shipbuilding, and we do get a great deal when it comes to being the UK's centre for every single submarine. And the gentleman there who applauded earlier, who's now laughing, look, there are bases all over England who are desperate for this work. All over England. And if we say we don't want the submarines, there's a queue of cities who want this work. There's a queue of yards who want to build the aircraft carriers, the destroyers and the frigates of the future. I just want to keep that work in Scotland. Well, and you do that by remain part of the United Kingdom.
Can I say, apparently not Plymouth. Plymouth doesn't want the nuclear submarines because last month they said it was too dangerous for the good citizens of Plymouth to have such a base near it. But if we actually look at facts, when Labour were actually in power, in response to a question, Dr Liam Foxend, Secretary of State Defence, said, "I'm aware of the fact that between 2000 and 2010, the total UK reduction of service and civilian personnel was 11.6% in the UK, but the reduction in Scotland was 27.9%. So we've seen the record of the Labour Party in power in terms of defence jobs, and that's why only 1 in 20 of UK defence jobs is currently in Scotland. And independent Scotland, all the defence jobs will be in Scotland, and it will be for the people to elect the government they want, and with the defence policy that's right and appropriate for the people of Scotland."
So how many destroyers would you build?
Sorry, Jim. Honourable.
How many destroyers, Kenny?
Well,
how many?
What we've already said, if you'd listened, was that by the end of this year we will have a detailed defence policy with how many ships we will actually have. By the end of this year, will the Labour Party have any details of what it will have
I believe that point's been made already.
Jim wasn't listening.
I think Ruth and I are going to break into song just to give you a wee change. So, or get a word in. Can I just go back to the question from Mr. Nisbet? Again, I listened carefully to what Kenny said, but what I find strange is that you talk about going to the United Kingdom and negotiating to divvy up a bit of the Royal Navy that it can come to an independent Scotland. I don't know how you can do that unless you actually have some kind of strategy for defence and some kind of strategy for foreign policy. Because I can tell you that the foreign policy of an independent Scotland will be a very different matter to the foreign policy of the United Kingdom. And that's everything to do with scale, with arenas of influence, with what you do, with the influence you have, the powers you connect with, the relationships you strike. And an independent Scotland is not going to be able to emulate that. But can I come to two things? Now, Kenny, I listened to you in peace and quiet, and I think you owe me that courtesy. Kenny said specifically about Faslane that he praised Norway, that Norway had far more jobs than were at Faslane. But Kenny omitted to say to you that the Norwegians are spending nearly double in their defence budget what Kenny's independent Scotland would spend. So I have to question the accuracy of that analysis. And this final thing I would say is, the only information I have about Faslane and the effect currently on the local economy of the jobs which Faslane creates and the spend that that makes possible in this wider economy is, it's an independent survey. It was called an ECOS survey, And according to that, there are 11,000 jobs at risk, some directly at the base, the others in the broader economy. And in terms of the supply chain, what all that generates out into this area, and the standard, what they call the standard income multiplier, you're talking about £250 million. If I lived in this area, I wouldn't be putting that at risk.
Ruth Wishart, you do live in this area.
Thank you. I should say, you know, that a lot of this inter-party politicking is actually quite academic, because the chap who's now in charge of the Strategic Defence Review is Danny Alexander, otherwise known as the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. And what he said a couple of weeks ago was he thinks the idea that somehow out of thin air we can carve a multi-billion-pound pocket to pay for Trident is not financially realistic. Our current approach is based on Cold War assumptions. We're in the 21st century and the world is changing. I don't think they're going to come out in favour of Trident anyway. But can I say how dispiriting it is to hear lots of people argue about tomorrow's Scotland being predicated on how many bombs we can build or weapons we can build. I don't think that's what I want tomorrow's Scotland to be. And one more thing quickly. Jim has quite often said tonight that he's keen to build 2 generations of nuclear submarines. Actually, I don't think that burnishes his multilateral credentials very much. He's going to keep building nuclear submarines in the hope that somehow that will persuade other people not to. I don't think so.
Okay, time is pressing on. That draws us to the end of tonight's debate. Throughout the night, we've had several hundred, if not thousands, of people following this online. Probably the former. However, it's a new format.
Always look at the bright side.
It's a new format. However, I've got my telephone, Jim.
Several dozen.
And we asked at the start of the night, given what you're hearing at tonight's debate, will you be voting for or against independence? And the poll says that for is 14.3% and against 85.7%.
The only way is up.
That was me on my phone.
That's a lot of tweets from Jim Murphy. So thank you very much to those who followed us online and on Twitter and listened on your radio. Thank you very much, of course, to you, our audience, for turning up tonight, and also to our panellists for giving up their time to come to Helensburgh.
Shared events like this, and it's almost impossible to include everybody, but what I do think was that we covered a range of subjects that really mattered to the area, so I guess from that point of view it was quite successful.
How did you feel about the audience in general? What did you think the general feeling was for or against? I mean, we did hear on Twitter that the yes vote was very, very low.
Well, I'm a yes voter, so I can add a 1 percentage point to the yes vote. And actually, the one thing that didn't come out tonight, and I always want to say this as a yes voter, is that if you're not voting yes for a particular party, you're voting yes for an independent Scotland, and then there's an election comes along and you can vote for whoever you like. So I'm not sure about that poll. Honestly, I mean, I'm old enough to remember the last referendum, the last 2 referendums, in fact. And the one thing you can be sure about is if there's not going to be any jam tomorrow, if people don't vote yes now, then it was dead for 20 years the last time, and it will be dead for 20 years or forever the next time. So if you're looking for jam tomorrow, don't hold your breath.
I think a lot of them were very, very interesting questions. And I also think that, you know, we really ought to keep the base up here.
What are your feelings on the existence of Faslane Naval Base as a place for nuclear submarines and the referendum coming in a year's time?
I don't see any problem with that at all. I think it's the base, it's for the United Kingdom base, as I would call it, because lots of people work there, the Navy's there, and they're part of the United Kingdom, and that's where it should be.